Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. Thank you all for tuning in. Today, I want to talk to you about how to get the perfect credit score. I am fortunate enough to say that I have an 850 credit score, which is the highest score that you can get. Now, before I tell you how I got there, I want to tell you the importance of having good credit. A lot of people think that it's just to get approved for stuff, and they're partially right, but there's a lot of things in your life that get impacted by how good your credit is. Another thing I want to make clear is that this is not going to contain any magic tricks. This is going to be things that are basically based on hard work, consistency, and time. So there's no magic tricks to it. Anybody can do this over time if they put their minds to it, right? So, but it's not like it's going to happen overnight. Now, why is it important to have a good credit score? Well, obviously, the first things that people may think of is like getting approved for a credit card of some sort, which is true, right? Or you maybe applying for a mortgage, something like that. However, what you don't realize is that a lot of different vendors in your life use your credit score to determine, number one, if they're going to approve you. Number two, what your premiums or rates are going to be. And number three, if you're a good credit risk overall, so think about car insurance, for example, things that you never thought about. Car insurance companies use your credit to determine whether or not they're going to approve you and to determine your premium. And I know that may sound crazy to some people because you might say, what does my driving history has anything to do with my credit? But in fact, a lot of these companies are now actually pulling credit and they look at it the same way a bank would. And they look at your payment history because that's going to determine how likely you are to pay them back as well. And it will determine your premium. Even your existing carrier might take a look at your credit to determine if you're still worth renewing your policy. So car insurance is a big one. Another thing that people don't really think about or realize is other types of insurance, like your homeowner's insurance, for example. If you own a home and you apply for homeowner's insurance, very likely that home insurance carrier is also going to take a look at your credit. What else? Think about when you apply for an employment, for a new job. A lot of employers are now running background checks, credit reports that actually can impact your ability to get a job or not, depending on how serious the employer takes it. I know like people in the military, for example, like they have to have all their things in order in terms of credit. I used to do some work with the military a few years ago, and yeah, that was a major thing. Especially people that had like top secret clearances and stuff. They had to have all their ducks in order. So it can even impact your ability to get a job. Think about even if you don't own a home, if you're out there, you apply to rent a house or rent an apartment. Most likely, the new landlord or the real estate management company is going to run your credit because they want to see how you pay your other creditors, in addition to how you've paid your prior rent. So that can also impact whether or not you get approved. It can also impact the quality of that approval, meaning the better your credit score, the better rates that you're going to get. Even with things like utilities, right? Sometimes you move and you open up a new account, like for electric or gas. If you have a really good score, they might just open it with no deposit required. If your score isn't that great, they might require an upfront deposit. And cable companies do this, cell phone companies do this. So you want to make sure you have the best possible credit score. When it comes to credit cards, your credit limit is also going to be determined partially by what your score is. So the better your score, the higher the credit limit that you're going to get approved for. Now, another thing that I wanted to make clear was having a perfect credit score is not the all and be all. Like it's not necessarily the goal. If it is your goal, fine, but you can get just as good offers and credit approvals and all that stuff by having a really good score that doesn't need to be perfect. So I want to make that clear because a lot of times, people might over obsess over the number. So again, 850 is the highest, but if you have a 799, a 760, you might still do just as well. So let me give you a quick breakdown. Right now, the FICO score, which is specifically what I'm talking about, is broken down into 5 categories. It goes poor, fair, good, very good, and exceptional. Poor is less than 580, right? So if you have less than 580, you're going to have a hard time getting approval for something. Or if you do get approved, it's going to be pretty harsh terms, higher interest rates, bigger deposits, and so on like that. It's not going to be as pretty. Fair goes from 580 to 669. Good is from 670 to 739. Very good is from 740 to 799. And exceptional is 800 plus. So I've never gotten any additional benefit by having an exceptional credit score than when I had a very good score. So when I had a 750, a 760, I pretty much got the identical terms as now, right? So I point that out because yes, it would be nice to get a perfect credit score, but just don't over obsess of it. But I still wanted to tell you how I got there in case that is something that is of interest to you. But just know that as long as you're in the very good section, in that tier between 740, 799, you're going to be fine anyway, right? Obviously, if you can get into the 800s, congratulations, right? Go for it. Why not? So let's talk about the things that make up the actual formula of credit. And then I'm going to tell you what I did there, basically in order to arrive at the 850 credit score. So number one thing, when you look at the credit wheel, there are things that are impacted based on the percentage. So I'm going to tell you exactly like what impacts what. So for example, the biggest factor into the overall credit score is your payment history. And that sounds very basic, right? So basically, paying your bills on time is the thing that has the most weight when it comes to the formula that calculates your score. So that's a no-brainer right there. But it's important because a lot of the times people, sometimes if they feel like, let's say you're struggling to pay your debt, and so sometimes people just forego making a payment altogether. And that's really going to impact your score, especially if you're 30 days or more over. So if for some reason you don't have all the money you need to make a full payment or something, you're carrying the balance, at the very least, make sure that you make the minimum payment. So that way it gets reported in good standing and you don't have a negative ding in your credit for not paying on time. So you can call your creditor, see if you get a lower interest rate, maybe adjust the terms somehow. You can maybe, when interest rates are better, if you can consolidate your debt, whatever you need to do, but don't miss a payment because that is the absolute number one thing that's going to get your credit messed up. So if you can keep a good payment history, even if it means making the minimum payment sometimes, it's better than not making a payment at all. So number one thing, 35% of the entire formula. The next big thing carries 30%, and that is the amounts owed. So the lower that you have as a balance, as a percentage of your overall debt, the better it is. So for example, if you have $10,000 in available credit and you owe $2,000, there's something called a credit utilization ratio. Basically, you divide your balance by the amount of your credit limit. So for example, say you have $2,000 credit card balance, your limit is $10,000, you have a 20% credit utilization ratio. Right? And that means that the lower it is, the better it makes you look, because it looks like, okay, you have this money available to use, but you're still not actually overextending yourself. Usually people say on the finance field, you want to, if you are carrying a balance, ideally you would want not to carry a balance. You want to pay your balances in full if you have like credit card, for example. But if you don't have that ability, at the very least, if you could work it out, make sure that you don't owe more than 30% of the overall limit. This is why it's important that if you have a good credit score, you get a higher limit, sometimes more than what you actually need. And the benefit of that is that you're able to then use enough to keep that credit utilization ratio down. So if you have $10,000 available in credit, you want to make sure that your balance isn't more than $3,000 because anything over that is going to negatively impact your score. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people sometimes take a debt consolidation loan or maybe take advantage of a 0% APR offer on a credit card, right? And that is good, right? So I'm going to talk about that in a second, but keep in mind that doing those things can sometimes ding your credit as well. So, and since we're talking about amounts owed, sometimes when you consolidate a new loan or you take advantage of a 0% APR card, you immediately max out that card. So all of a sudden you have new credit and you probably took advantage of it all because you were trying to put as much as you can on that card to take advantage of the 0% APR. So depending on how you do it, if your debt utilization ratio ends up being very tight where you're pretty much maxing out to the credit max, is gonna hurt you. On top of that, you're gonna have a new account open up. So let's get into that for a second. The third biggest factor affects it by 15%, and that is the length of your credit history. So if you have a credit card that you've had for a long time, like in my case, I have had credit cards that I got in college. If you go to my website, you'll see that I actually make fun of myself because I say I got into debt in college before I even had a job because they were just given out when you were at the library getting the books, and I'm aging myself because I actually had to go to a bookstore or the library to go and get my books for school. But that was like over 20 years ago. Now, fast forward, that has actually helped me, right? So let me go back a second then. So the payment history, 35%, right? So I've been able to luckily make sure that I've been making on-time payments for years and years and years. Have I missed payments in the past? Absolutely. It happens, right? But I've been very conscious that I'm making sure that I stay making payments on time. In terms of amounts owed, thankfully, I was able to, I have had debt in the past. But I was able to get it down to the point where I no longer carry a credit card balance. I pay my balances in full. I take advantage of using the credit cards for like points and things like that. But I don't carry a balance. So my credit utilization ratio is very small. When I look at my statement, it usually says 0 to 1% because I carry zero balances. The third thing is the length of credit history that we're talking about, right? So I have my credit card since college. I started college in 1997 and graduated in 2001. And I have credit cards still from when I was a freshman in college. I went to the bookstore to get my books that were given out. I was talking to somebody the other day who were reminiscing. They were talking about it used to give you like a free t-shirt or a water bottle and a credit card application. And I had no job at the time. I was just a freshman, just getting ready to start school. And it's like, all right, credit card, let me apply for it. I remember my first credit card, I think they gave me a $250 credit limit. And I got into debt in college. I used that money to go to Cancun on spring break. I remember, and the credit limit kept going up from 250. After 6 months, it went up to 500. Well, guess what? I maxed it out. I graduated college already in debt, in addition to some student loans that I had, so it was a hole to climb out of. So the length of the credit history is something to keep in mind because sometimes, going back to consolidating loans or taking advantage of a 0% APR card, or even if you've done the hard work and just paid off your credit cards, keep in mind that if you have something that you've had open for a very long time, like in my case, we're talking since 1997, right? Don't close that account because if it's a major credit card and you've had it for that long of a time, that really is going to help you get to a perfect credit score or as close as you can. So what I do, to give you an example, I have one credit card that I've had since 1998. I currently charge something that is like $2.99 on it. It's like a Microsoft storage or something every single month. And then I pay it in full, right? So every single month there's activity on it because the other thing is you don't want to have accounts that are just sleeping, right? They call it dormant accounts just for like years and years and years. The creditor may just close them because you're not using them and then it's going to hurt your score anyway. So I actually keep it active that way. So I always tell people, charge something you were going to charge anyway, like a subscription, like a Netflix or something, put it on that one particular card. Even if you've done the good job of paying it off, don't actually close it. So if you get a better rate, a 0% APR introductory rate, or a better rate debt consolidation loan, yes, by all means, take advantage of that to save on interest, but make sure that you keep the account that you've had for a very long time open and just charge something to it every once in a while that you normally were going to spend money on regardless, just to keep that activity going and make sure you keep that length of credit history. And this is the one that most people can control. Like Generation Z and millennials are probably not going to be able to take advantage of this right now just because maybe they don't have that length. But so there's nothing you can do about that. Just wait for time to actually pass. But the other things you could, in fact, control, right? Your payment history, the amounts that are owed. The next thing is the new credit that carries 10% of the weight in the formula. And that means that if you have a ton of new accounts open in a short period of time, you're going to ding your score. Some of you might have already experienced this, or you had a certain credit score. I know a lot of people get their credit scores from via their credit card. You might open up and say a new car loan. That's happened to me. And this is why I say don't get so attached to the numbers sometimes, because I've had an 850 credit score drop to an 842 because I opened something up, and all of a sudden I have a new credit that hasn't been used for long. So that can happen, right? So if you open too many or have too many credit inquiries, then that can lower your score. When you're shopping for a mortgage and stuff, you're allowed a certain amount of inquiries within a certain amount of time because they know that you're shopping. But just keep that in mind, right? You don't want to go out and open up 3 credit cards within a week. Immediately that's going to say to the system, okay, this person is in need of credit, and maybe they're going to overextend themselves, and you take a ding. So new credit is important to keep in mind, right? So that's what happens to a lot of people when they take advantage of a new credit card that's offering 0% APR. All of a sudden they have a new credit card. They max the credit card out because they're taking advantage of the credit, and they close the old accounts. So it's like a tsunami effect, right? You're doing all these things that are negatively going to impact your credit, even though you are doing something that's good for you over the long term by paying down debt and saving on interest. But those are little tricks like that I've learned. So keep those old accounts open and be careful not to run your credit too much or open up new credit. And then the last thing on the wheel is the credit mix. And that is basically having a healthy mix of different types of accounts. Obviously do not go out and get something that you don't need just to quote unquote start building credit. But over time, these things tend to happen naturally. Like when I graduated college, I had student loans. So that started building my credit. Then I got a car loan. So now I have student loans, credit cards, car loan. Eventually I bought a house. So I had a mortgage, student loans, credit cards. So you do want a healthy mix. It's not necessary, but something to keep in mind. Eventually that's just going to help you out, just because that's just the way life is, right? You're going to eventually perhaps maybe finance a car, finance a house, have student loans, have credit cards. So that healthy mix is going to help you. And that's what I did. I kept a good healthy mix. I still have a car loan every couple of years. And I have my credit cards, but I no longer have student loans. I don't carry a credit card balance, but I still have different types of accounts that are open. So something to keep in mind. And the other one that's not in the wheel is one I like to add, and it's protecting your credit. A lot of people don't realize that with all this technology now, you're very likely to get your information stolen, because a lot of hackers are able to get access to third-party companies that you use, and it could be even like your healthcare provider or your employer or something, and they might get access to your social security number, date of birth, address, maybe take out lines of credit or credit cards or some sort of debt in your name. So one thing I do is monitor and protect. So I actually sign up for a service that I pay for every month that sends me alerts if there's any new attempt at opening a new account, if a credit card balance goes up that's higher than usual. If a credit card that I haven't used in a while gets used, I get an email. Thankfully, all those things that I mentioned has been me that's done it. But it's good to keep track, check your score. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You can go to annualcreditreport.com, get a free copy of your credit reports. That way, you want to make sure that you monitor it, you take a look at it, see where you're at. Are all those things there correct? Because there might be something that you've already paid off that shouldn't be there as a negative balance. So you want to make sure that is accurate, right? So get your free credit report, annualcreditreport.com. Check it out, make sure there are no errors. If there are errors, make sure you dispute those. Number 2, then consistently monitor your credit. So you want to make sure that you go to annualcreditreport.com and continue to check it out. You can sign up for the paid options as well. It's not necessary, but you can sign up for those paid options so that you can get alerts. And another one that's free to do that's very important is actually doing a credit freeze. And I talked about this in another episode, but and that's what my wife and I do. Basically, we freeze our credit, meaning that I can still use my credit cards like I have them now. Nothing stops with that. However, no new credit can be opened in my name without me unfreezing it. So if somebody even me, actually, if I go right now to like a car dealership and they try to run my credit, they won't be able to because I frozen my credit with all three credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. I'll put a link into all of those three so that you can look into it yourself. Great idea to do for your children as well, because a lot of identity theft happens with kids because nobody's monitoring their credit. You're thinking like, oh, they're not going to have credit until they're 18 plus, right? So you want to make sure you freeze your children's credit as well. And this has been great because now if somebody actually does have your information, they still can't go out and open up credit cards in your name, right? And it's pretty easy to set up, also pretty easy to manage. So before, like say if I'm going to shop for a car or I need new credit of some sort, I just unfreeze it. If I'm going to get a new apartment or something, whatever it is, I usually open it up for a certain window. If I can ask the person that's going to run the credit, sometimes they know which credit bureau they use. I would say, hey, which credit bureau I use in TransUnion, Experian, all three. And they might tell you, oh, yeah, we use Experian. So I'll just go unfreeze it real quick for like a 48-hour period, have them run my credit. Once I'm approved for whatever it is, lock it back up. So this is another way. So you want to make sure you monitor and also protect your credit because you don't want anyone putting something in there fraudulently. And another one it's not directly related to credit. You can also get an IRS identity protection pin since we're talking about identity theft. So that way nobody can file a fraudulent tax return and like basically steal from the IRS, but it gets you in the middle because when you go file your tax return, the IRS says, hey, we already have a tax return on file for you. So we can't give you a refund or even process a return because you've already filed it. So I've had people that have gone through that, and that could be very, just very hard to go through. So if you can plan ahead, get the identity protection pin from the IRS, I could put a link in the show notes for that as well. And that way you get to protect yourself. So that way nobody can file a tax return unless they have that pin that gets mailed to you every single year. So there's another way just to protect yourself in general. So these are all the things that I did. The one that just took more time was just the length of history, just because I happen to have credit cards since I was in college, right? But because I was able to keep the payments on time, keep the balances low or zero, keep a good, healthy mix, payment history, and a very small credit utilization ratio, I finally got to the 850 credit score. However, let me just reiterate that do not get attached to that number. Again, if you are in that the very good category, then you're fine. If you have a 780 credit score, you're probably going to get the same term that somebody with an 820 is going to get. I'm sure there's something out there, but I've yet to see like, oh, if you have an 840, you get, maybe there is, right? Like if you have an 840, you get this much better in your rate. It's possible, but it's going to be very identical. It's not going to be like a huge difference anyway. So don't get so caught up in that 850. But if that's your goal, you want to join the club, then go for it. And if you ever do, man, hit me up and let me know. I'll show you the secret handshake. So that is all. That's all I got. Like I said, it was nothing magical. It's just having a little bit of knowledge about certain things, being intentional, being consistent, and putting in the work. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you find this useful. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.